It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Paris correspondent Erin Zaleski is with us. How are you?
Well, thanks.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist for the Daily and the Sunday Telegraph.
Good evening.
How's your summer been?
It was warm.
It was warm.
Yes, as opposed to now.
We're going to be talking about the weather a lot in a moment. Stay with us for that. Matthew Dalton, Paris correspondent, the Wall Street Journal. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
We love, by the way, having visitors. And Siddharth Bhatia, co-founder and editor of Wire.in, is with us. Tell us just in a word, what about Wire?
So it's a venture started by journalists who were fed up of working for big establishments, and got together, put a little bit of money together and set it up as a not-for-profit 2 years ago. And it's become the #1 website, most influential website in India.
All right. The future of journalism perhaps is smaller is better in some instances.
Yes, but not necessarily profitable. Yes.
We'll get to that maybe later. The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. In 5 days, the Houston area got the equivalent of roughly 1 million gallons of water for every single person in southeastern Texas. It's by boat that correspondent Philip Crowther followed a local fire chief's rescue efforts.
The family of 5 refuses to leave.
God bless you, my friend.
And the fire department cannot force them.
But they do not want to leave right now, and I'm not going to leave behind.
Okay, we're not coming back.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, buddy, I'm telling you, write your social security number on your arm with a Sharpie pen so we'll be able to identify you.
Erin Zaleski, your reaction to what we've seen in Houston, what is it, 50 inches of rain in 5 days?
It's astonishing, especially a huge city like Houston. It's the U.S.'s 4th largest city, I believe. So to see a city of that magnitude brought to its knees, to see scenes like that, it's astonishing.
All right, and it's bringing Houston to its knees. It's also slowing down the rest of the United States. We're talking about 1/3 of all oil refineries in the country affected in an area that's home to 1,300 chemical plants, many like the Arkema plant in low-lying areas. Their flooding forced a precipitated shutdown and a fire that sent plumes of smoke into the sky. Matthew Dalton, this storm laying bare a lot of the shortcomings of Houston and perhaps the rest of the world, saying the U.S.'s reaction to what are expected to be an increase in these sorts of storms.
Well, it's true. This highlights a big problem with the way U.S. infrastructure is set up. A lot of very important oil refineries, chemical plants are near the water, near ports where they logically should be, but there has not been enough done to build up infrastructure to protect these facilities. And as you said, it's going to be with the effects of climate change, which all scientists say are going to become worse over the coming decades. This kind of major disruption with our infrastructure is going to be increasingly common, and the remedies for it are going to be extremely expensive.
There's also been, just to interrupt for a second, there's also been explosive development in Houston over the past few years. So a lot of homes and businesses have been built over wetlands that used to absorb this type of water, and that's no longer possible. So that's another development issue.
According to a Washington Post investigation, more than 7,000 residential buildings have been constructed since 2010 in floodable areas. So what's the lesson of this story in that respect?
I think the U.S. has to start rethinking where it allows development. That's not just the federal government, but also cities and states. There are a lot of government programs that actually provide incentives for people right now to build in these areas, and those programs were developed before we understood what the effects of climate change were going to be. And if governments, federal, state, and local, continue to allow that kind of breakneck growth without any kinds of infrastructure, counteracting infrastructure to protect that development, then the problems are only going to get worse.
Problems are only going to get worse, and we've seen reports of officials in Texas that sort of, to get stuff done, have to dance around using the term climate change. They have to use different terminology. Otherwise, stuff in the Republican-controlled legislature doesn't get approved. We have the Environmental Protection Agency, which said that people were politicizing the events that are taking place in Houston.
It's not just the EPA, it's also the fact that the Department of Energy is headed by the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, who has said that he doesn't believe in climate change, and worse than that, that the fact that the most of the Department of Energy, which does much more than just take care of energy, oil, etc., but also of any kind of disaster and in a sense was home to the chief risk officer of the United States, and the post has been not cancelled, suppressed, but the person who was in charge has been fired, and nobody is replacing that person. So they were watching for nuclear risk, they were watching for flooding risk, they were watching for energy risks. There's a combination of several right now because, as Erin explained, there are dangerous plants in the area, and the result is that there isn't even the human infrastructure or the memory of a department that probably was the department in the United States that knew most about this, and that's really a problem. But on the other hand, if you look at, for instance, the experience of Katrina in Louisiana, the neighboring state, in 2005, there was infrastructure, but the infrastructure had not been maintained. And if you look at the levées, it's more or less it's a French word to say, those are, in a sense, the ramparts against the tidal water or the flood water. And those have not been maintained enough. They were not maintained enough on the Mississippi at the time of Katrina, and they were not maintained enough in Houston, and they were broken. And you saw videos on everywhere on social media of when the water was going through the levées. And there are hard questions to be asked about actually what is the Trump plan for infrastructure. Strangely enough, the American president who's been talking about building more infrastructure is this one, who is not especially for state intervention. But the question is not just to have the infrastructure, is the infrastructure well designed? Because if you were in Holland, for instance, it is designed well enough to withstand the kind of flooding that they can have. So the thing about the United States is the thing that was actually designed was not studied to withstand that kind of disaster, and that's what has now to be sort of entirely recalculated.
All right, so there has to be a recalculation. Is there going to be that recalculation? Do you think this is some kind of turning point for the United States?
First of all, I don't think I can't imagine they ignoring it. And second, it so happens that right now, in a strange way, the Trump infrastructure plan, it happens at exactly the same time as the European Juncker plan for infrastructure. We have a sort of in sync economic cycle of investment that it would actually be a good occasion to do this just right now in the United States.
All right, go ahead, Matthew.
Well, I think there's, unfortunately, right now with the Trump administration and the gridlock in Washington, the political gridlock is just too serious for there to really be an effective response to this, given the political circumstances.
We're talking about Houston, a town with no zoning, and that also has been an issue, of course. Part of the reason why there was so much building in these wetland areas. By the way, it's not just Houston. The number of record-breaking precipitation events around the planet on the rise. Bangladesh has been hit by its worst monsoon rains since 1998, the same that have triggered floods in Nepal, Pakistan, and are blamed for that building collapse earlier in the week in a crowded neighborhood of Mumbai that has left 33 dead. Siddharth Bhatia, when you look at these floods, the worst since 2005 in your city, what are your thoughts in terms of how people are handling it and what the future holds?
So to put it in context, I think the city had something like almost 400 millimeters of rain in about 12 hours. And about 100 millimeters had to flow out per second from each of the outlets. And it could only cope with 50. I'm giving ballpark numbers. This kind of rain happens once in a while, but a whole lot of confluence of, shall we say, man-made problems, natural calamity, etc. To give you an example, Bombay is a conglomeration of 7 islands with reclaimed land, and it just has to flow into the sea right away. It cannot stay on land even for a second. The water just has to flow. Now, rampant construction, I was listening to what they were saying. Rampant construction, zoning laws flouted, debris in stormwater drains. It's the same story. Corruption in the civic administration. So all that is built up.
In the case of this building collapse, it was a condemned building.
But so the city has thousands of condemned buildings which are 100 years old, and a whole series of laws in place: rent control, landlord not interested, tenants refusing to move out because they are paying very little money. So the whole series of things come together. I believe the building's tenants had been told to move out some time ago, but they refused because they have nowhere to go. So they stayed put. The rains, the pressure came. The foundations must have been completely, destroyed, and it just came down. And it happens every year. A few buildings every year.
And is it a turning point for Mumbai? What's happened?
Well, 2005 was supposed to be the turning point. A lot of laws were put into place. Not all have been followed. And I'm afraid the city, its administration, and its citizens sometimes tend to go back to the usual. So business is normal as it was. So the buildings keep coming up, the infrastructure can't take it, and the drains have not been changed for about 80 years, 90 years, etc.
Aaron Zaleski, the U.S. president, expected back in Texas on Saturday. He came earlier in the week with his wife, Melania. Your thoughts on how he's handled things? He's also due to announce some $6 billion in aid for areas stricken by Harvey.
Well, I think people are looking for this next visit. They're looking for a bit more empathy on the part of the president. There was a sort of an aloofness in that, yes, he came, yes, he surveyed the damage, he made some statements, but he didn't really interact with, there was no interaction with victims. There wasn't a lot of sympathy for the people affected shown on his part. So this might be an opportunity to show a bit more of a human side.
Matthew?
Well, I think anything for the president that changes the discussion from what's happening in Washington with the Russia investigation, with the severe troubles that his legislative agenda has run into, is a good thing for him. A natural disaster can often be an opportunity for a president to look presidential and sound presidential, something that Trump has had a problem with. And so if he can take advantage of this, then it's an opportunity for him. And I think when he came down last time, Aaron's right, he kind of remarked on the size of a crowd that had assembled outside of where he was speaking. He didn't really seem to have a lot of, didn't show that, human touch for the suffering that people were going through. So it's an opportunity for him.
Yeah, he seemed to be working hard to avoid the political pitfalls of George W. Bush in 2005.
Such as not showing up at all.
Such as not showing up at all, which he did. How did he do in your eyes in that respect?
I think, unfortunately, we've come to a point in polarizing commentary that it's almost impossible for people to comment on Trump or his wife, or indeed his wife's shoes, without criticizing this president. And my personal point on this one is that there's plenty to criticize about this president. He may not have been the most empathetic of all, but by and large, he did the job. What can you do? Can you go and sort of disturb really complicated rescue efforts? Go and yes, he could probably have gone to center where people were regrouped and sort of hoping to dry themselves and have something warm inside them for a bit and bemoan what happened to their possessions. But by and large, he's been doing the job, and I think there will be plenty for us to criticize him in the future. God knows there has been in the past. I'm not going to sort of start picking bits about how he sounded. He did it. He was there. It's more than his predecessor did the last time there was a major catastrophe in the area.
Of course, he pulled out of the Paris climate change deal, and he cut funding for the agency that deals with emergency rescues. And
did not staff the department that was overlooking part of this. But yes, no, these are real problems.
Siddharth Bhatia, your thoughts on that when you...
Well, India follows President Trump very closely because relations are warming up quite a bit. Between the two countries, Mr. Narendra Modi and Mr. Donald Trump seem to get along quite fine. I think in some respects, they are both deal makers. and the deals are being made with the US and a few other countries. So, yes, the one thing.
But what do Indians think when he expresses climate change skepticism or denial?
It's not a big public debate in the country, but those who know about it are aghast. Those who understand these things are simply taken aback. India has been having a lot of problems on the Paris Agreement, as you probably know, and the US has pulled out. But India itself has been having some issues on feeling that it's being pressured to take certain steps that it doesn't want to take.
Matthew, you covered that summit in 2015. When you look at where things stand now, how's it going?
Well, I think this week really highlighted one of the key issues with the Paris Agreement and why it's important. The Paris Agreement, one of the provisions that it had was that it required wealthy countries to provide financing to developing countries to build up their infrastructure, to make their economies more resistant to the effects of climate change. And this week, you saw in the US and in India torrential rains, huge storms. In the US, not many people have died, maybe 10, a few,
a little more than 40 are expected to have died at the end of the...
Okay. Hundreds of people have died in India. More than 1,000 people have died.
In South Asia.
And in South Asia. And so there, right there, you see the stark disparity in the preparedness of these two different economies to respond to climate and to deal with climate change, something that the Paris Agreement was really supposed to fix. And it seems, and the irony is that the United States, according to scientists, developed countries are the ones that are responsible for the emissions that are causing this this climate behavior, and unfortunately, developing countries are the ones that are going to suffer the worst consequences.
All right, we're going to talk about this more when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Aaron Zaleski, Paris correspondent. Welcome back as well to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist for the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph. Matthew Dalton, who works at the Paris bureau of the Wall Street Journal, and Siddharth Bhatia, co-founder of Wire.in, editor as well of said news outlet based in Mumbai or Bombay.
No, well, Delhi and Bombay. Yeah.
Delhi and Bombay, okay. It's just wanted to tell you as well, the one casualty of Hurricane Harvey, which we haven't reported on very much, is, well, the job of a teacher at the University of Tampa. Since deleted tweets from a certain Kenneth Story, a visiting assistant professor of sociology, have spread across the internet after they were posted on Sunday. The first one stated, quote, "I don't believe in instant karma, but this kind of feels like it for Texas. Hopefully this will help them realize the GOP doesn't care about them." He apologized, but still he's been sacked. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, your thoughts on this?
It's part of a general movement that you're not supposed to express anything that is slightly dissenting from orthodox pietists. It was a stupid tweet. It was a stupid thing to say, but the idea that you now will sort of, your job hangs on something stupid, you might say, and he said sorta, which really meant that he didn't really believe in karma anyway. I think this is pathetic. We see this everywhere. We see this in universities. We see, well, this professor who I notice is a visiting professor, not tenured. It's a bit more difficult to get rid of somebody with tenure. But students now expect to be treated like consumers, and if they don't like something, they want to return it, and they want the whole thing to be entirely forbidden. I think it's a very dangerous and slippery slope. And je suis more Charlie than ever. I believe in the right to offend regularly like a gong.
Is free speech under fire?
I would say yes. I think it's especially under the current administration, we saw that also even during his campaign, this very hostile relationship with the press.
For Donald Trump?
From Donald Trump, yes.
Right.
And in general, I mean, this is an example. I mean, I'm not linking this to Trump in any way, But yeah, was the tweet in poor taste? Yes, there's something to be said for kicking people when they're down. I mean, mentioning a word like karma after someone has lost a loved one or their home, yeah, not very sensitive, in poor taste. Should he have lost his job over it? No.
But it's inappropriate for a sociology professor to perhaps take political sides. I don't know, for something like this to be blatantly partisan. I don't know. Is it or not, Matthew?
No, I think that was fine to make an argument about a climate change, to even make a partisan argument is fine. It was just a very insensitive thing to say at a time when there was so much suffering. And I do though like to recall that there are in the Christian right, for example, there are preachers and pastors that have a record of, after some kind of calamity hits the United States, trying to link it to various sins that the country has perpetrated, like homosexuality, gay marriage, abortion, and this was much less offensive than those particular remarks. It was just insensitive.
All right, so Matthew, what's your religion on pardon the pun, the UN Human Rights Commission publicly criticizing this week the President of the United States for his badgering of the press?
I think President Trump's words towards the press, his attitude is worrying, and I think when the president says stuff like that, that these are bad people. That's what he said about journalists, that they don't like our country, they don't like America. I mean, those are very serious things for the president to be saying, and when he does say those things, it's possible that it could have result in somebody doing something to a reporter, taking violent action against a reporter. That's worrying.
Are we talking about the UN Commission for Human Rights that had at its head Libya, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, countries where a dissenting opinion can get your head chopped off? Because quite frankly, I think it is obscene of them to say this. I don't like especially Donald Trump. I think what he says about the press is not nice. I think he could, abstain from that and still make whatever points he likes to make. But I think these people haven't got a stiletto to stand on. I mean, quite frankly, it is obscene to have them criticize a country where journalists are not jailed when they do those things and worse.
Well, Siddharth Bhatia, your thoughts on this?
And so I think we should separate what the United Nations body is and the fact that President Trump has been going after the press, and I think it plays well with his followers, his devotees almost, because it kind of sets the tone. And I take the point well that it could result in something, because as it is in many countries, and I'm sure it happens in the US, the press is seen as some kind of elitist cabal, groups of people who are highly educated, who pass on their opinion, who tell the president what to do, and therefore cut off from the common American or common Indian, for that matter. And this kind of blatantly hostile relationship, rather than just the usual frisson, as it were, can be very dangerous.
Is it different for when he says something at a rally from when he tweets it?
Well, both are the same. The impact, maybe the impacts vary slightly, but both are mainly the same, because not that he doesn't have a point of view and he should not express it, but to continuously say it, I think creates an impression of sorts.
You agree both are the same?
The constant reiteration of fake news. And I think some of his followers are going to respond to that. I mean, fake news is it's when a journalist deliberately disseminates a story that's not true. And it seems like Trump's definition of fake news is a story that he just doesn't like, or that maybe is not flattering about him. And that causes, I think, suspicion in the public, suspicion of journalists. Absolutely.
I mean, criticizing the media is one thing, but then going a step further and saying that they don't like the country, that they're bad people, that's another thing. And just to respond to the charge of hypocrisy by this panel, I mean, the guy who leveled this criticism, the head of the commission, is a Jordanian diplomat. He's not a member of the Saudi royal family, or he's. So I think it's true that the other countries on the commission have terrible human rights records, but that certainly doesn't absolve or lessen his criticism.
We all like Jordan because Jordan is one of the more reasonable countries in the area. But at the end of the day, if you do criticize the king in Jordan, you get in trouble in ways that you do not if you criticize Donald Trump in America. So all the same, I think there's really a case of I'm struggling to find a word that is not obscene, even when it comes from somebody moderate from a country that's doing more good than ill in the area.
All right. The discourse is more caustic, and you're talking about the cabal against journalists and drumming up passion among supporters of people. This week, India reported slower growth, which many blame in part on demonetization, which is last year's decision to put lower denominated bills, which brings us to the topic of trolling. Siddharth Bhatia, your website, reporting on the hashtag demonetization success. Tell us about this, how this is used.
Well, firstly, and I'm sure it applies to the others, so I get a lot of love every morning when I wake up and switch on my Twitter. So we've all been there. But the wire seems to attract a certain kind of troll. Who finds us... This
isn't a robot, right? These are real people.
No,
they're sending
mainly
out these
robots.
tweets.
Mainly robots.
Mainly
because
robots.
You see, one of the story clearly says that several people, including ministers, said almost the same thing. Well, the same thing. It was a stock phrase. And so there is a superpower working somewhere.
Is it working? Is demonetization considered a success thanks to this demonetization?
Gross failure.
No, but what's the public perception of it?
The public perception is it was gross failure, and now the statements made by economists a few months ago have now turned out to be correct. That it was a disaster. 85% of your currency suddenly vanishes from the market. So
has it stopped corruption?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No, because the whole idea was that cash transactions would disappear. Yes. And of course that hasn't happened because 100% of the money has come back. So it hasn't. So these are, so there was a counter narrative which we have reported about, and that is demonetization success to bolster the prime minister's kind of image, to say, well, he took the right decision. But when your growth rate drops by 2% points, it's a disaster. So demonetization
Still,
disaster
it's a little under 6%. We'd like to have 6% growth here.
Yeah, I wonder what that 6% contains, but yes. But it could have been more, and this has definitely had an impact. So this counter-narrative by trolls who are either robots or humans behaving like robots is definitely to counter this criticism.
All right, part of the new normal. It's time now for a Brexit update. Here's the short version. It's not going well.
At this point in time, we're far from being able to confirm sufficient progress.
And I think it's fair to say we've seen some concrete progress.
In some of the proposals, I see a kind of nostalgia.
I wouldn't confuse a belief in the free market for nostalgia.
Elisabeth Boutet, by the way, this is going to be a running show because it's the first week of every month where they're meeting in Brussels. Yes. And our correspondent, Maeve McMahon, we asked her, is this just posturing for the camera? She said, no, it's really going badly.
It's going very badly, and it's so badly that there was a persistent rumor among the teams working on Brexit in Brussels that this was really part of a cunning plan, and the British were preparing something straight, out of left field. And it took them several months to realize that no, there was no special plan, there was no cunning plan. It was going as badly, and they were as shambolic as they looked, which is something that is sort of disheartening. Although you still have a whole ideological sort of struggle being waged every day in British opinion. You're talking about bots, I think, who actually have, human beings waging it. But, no, it's going very well. No, it's not going well. Yes, it's going well. And the truth is that it is not planned.
You read the British press this Friday morning, and it's very polarized.
It's very polarized, and I work for a polarized newspaper who do not ask me about Brexit because I'm not polarized in the same direction.
Matthew Dalton, where's it all going? Because this is, of course, uncharted territory. No one's ever left the EU before. Have we already run out of time, or is there plenty of time for everyone to come to their senses?
Well, it depends what you consider coming to your senses. I guess a lot of people...
Which means coming to a deal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there has to be a deal. I think they can. The clock is ticking. What is it? 2 years? A little bit less than 2 years now that they have. So they could. It's possible. I think they could extend it. With the agreement of all the other EU countries.
27, E27.
I think this is the fundamental issue here is on the UK side, which is that the country is fundamentally divided and unsure and about what they want to out of this and whether they want to leave. I mean, the Brexit vote itself was very close. The UK economy is so deeply intertwined with the rest of Europe. There's free movement and there's free trade, and so the UK wants to still have free trade, and a lot of people still want free movement. So it's a quandary.
Just a quick word on this. This is the 20th anniversary on Thursday of the death of Princess Diana. When you think of Britain in 1997, you think of the Britain of 2017, as Matthew says, which doesn't know what it wants, really. Which way is Britain going?
I don't think Princess Diana had much to do about it, but
no, but we've been seeing all the images.
We've
been seeing all the images this week and it's been reminding us of what Britain was like back then.
It was like that about 3 years ago, and then Brexit, and it surprised people. And then what people discovered, there's this whole notion that there was the populist wave in Europe, and we found out that populism in Europe is a bit like unhappy families in Tolstoy. They're all each unhappy in their own way, and Britain is unhappy in that way. And they were expressing very different things about Brexit than the technical aspects. People were voting about sovereignty, and some of it was understood. I will sort of go out on a limb and say that one of the great artisans of Brexit was Jean-Claude Juncker and his people, because when repeatedly, and remember that in 2005 the French voted against the European Constitution, so it's not the first time that there are people who say Europe is opaque and not democratic, and all they said was, you don't know anything, go and study some more and then you will understand how wonderful we are. Well, they have a political job, and the political job was also to inspire support, and I think that they've also failed everybody, including the British, in that respect.
All right, many a soul in the France 24 newsroom is already suffering, by the way, from withdrawal symptoms. Sunday night aired the final episode of Season 7 of Game of Thrones. Cliffhangers are painful for fans. The 8th and final season won't be aired until 2019. How are you holding up, Matthew Dalton?
2019?
Yeah.
It's that long?
Yeah.
I guess a lot worse than I didn't realize it was that long. So that's pretty devastating, actually. But I don't want to talk about it anymore because I don't want to give away any spoilers to people who haven't watched the last.
You don't want to
season.
give away spoilers, but Aaron Zaleski. I mean, all the hashtags at the beginning of the week were about Game of Thrones, about specific plot elements.
It's true. I have friends watching this who are probably going to drum me out of town when I confess that I've never actually watched Game of Thrones. I get the impression that it's some sort of soap opera, but with dragons and decapitations.
What is it with Game of Thrones? Explain it.
It's it's basically the Tudors and the Wars of the Roses, and it's sort of enhanced late medieval British history, but it's wonderfully done. It started as a series of novels by George Martin, which are truly, I recommend them if you're feeling withdrawal symptoms, go and reread the books. The books are much better than the series, and the series itself is wonderful. But it's like all the fact that now the quality of the production of series and the quality of detail and the production values is such that you go to television now to see something complex and well written and well acted, and you leave our cinemas to 17-year-olds who want explosions. And that explains the withdrawal symptoms.
All right, for a feel of just how much this series has gone global, you can go to the Islamabad suburb of Rawalpindi. There you'll find a cafe inspired by the hit series.
It takes you back to the time when, you think that dragons do exist actually. And zombies, which are named White Walkers in the show. You think they're real, It feels so real, and, everything about the show, it's so real. That's one thing I love about the show.
So initially, the response was great. But to be honest, after some time, 2-3 months, there was a lukewarm response. But now, luckily for us, the season is being rebroadcasted. So when the season comes out and the episodes are being aired again, so we are back in the game.
Back in the game. Siddharth Bhatia, here we are talking about a U.S. television series that captures the attention of the entire planet.
Shakespeare with dragons, yes. But it's extremely well-mounted. I'm not a fan. I've watched just one show. It's extremely well-mounted, as you're saying, that television usually is seen as something which is superficial, and this has got a complex plot, complex sets. And it has sustained interest over all these years. And perhaps in these times, we are all looking for fantasies, I wonder. I mean...
Is it the fantasies or the political intrigue?
Both. It is. There is a lot of political intrigue. So it's a real story in that sense of people trying to, kill the other. Everything is thrown in. It is the War of Roses, and there's beheadings and incest. I mean, it's unbelievable.
That's not too late.
Unbelievable combination.
All right, sex and violence. We'll leave it there. Siddharth Bhatia, I want to thank you. I want to thank Elizabeth Mute, Matthew Dalton, Aaron Zaleski. Stay with us, though, please. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Sanam Chantier. Sanam, you've been focusing on what is something that's unprecedented for Kenya and for Africa.
Indeed. François, this story has been gaining a lot of traction. In fact, a number of international media outlets are running with images, as you can see on BuzzFeed here, taken from social media of supporters of the opposition, Raila Odinga, taken to the streets to celebrate. And you also have images of people...
The annulment of a presidential election.
Indeed, which will be called upon again in 60 days or so. Now, for his part, the incumbent president, Uhuru Kenyatta, has actually initially very reluctantly accepted the ruling. He took to Twitter, as you can see here, saying, "We believe in democracy and we are ready for the second round." This didn't last very long. He later came back with a very combative tone, slamming the court for ignoring the will of the people, and he called his Chief of Justice colleagues wakora, which means crooks in Swahili. Now, staying with Twitter, hashtag Supreme Court decides has been trending this Friday, and we have seen reactions from both sides of the political spectrum. We have one user here saying, "This is everyone's victory. Whoever you voted for, the ruling wasn't for or against the candidates, but for a credible process." As you mentioned earlier, François, this is unprecedented. This has never happened in Kenya nor the continent. So this is a very new beginning for them. But not, of course, as we expected, all reactions have been positive. We have supporters of Kenyatta who are saying that this was an absolute waste of time. And they very much believe and they're convinced that he's set for a second win. We have one user here who says President Uhuru Kenyatta's victory has been merely postponed. The NASA will be humiliated again in a fresh election. Now, interestingly, the one thing that has brought the two sides together, François, is their criticism of the international observers who were very quick to come out and praise the electoral process of the vote. I have one example here on Twitter, Dr. Minugu Miguna, who says international observers are overrated. There were 500. They soaked the sun and ratified on an egregious daylight robbery.
Yeah.
Now, of course, among those international observers, we had one of the most prominent diplomats of our time, the former U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, who was very vocal during his time in Kenya. So this could be a potential embarrassment for him.
Yeah, because what we had earlier was that academics telling us, Sanam, that observers come to these elections and they show up for election day, but they don't stick around when there's the tabulation and the compiling of the results.
Yeah, they have the reactions for it. Kerry at the time said, "We believe that the Elections Commission in Kenya has put together a process that will allow," and this is very strong, "each and every vote's integrity to be proven." And because of that, Kerry's been getting a lot of slack. We have something here from NTV Kenya, which is the leading television broadcasting station in the country. He's quoting a politician, Ken Okoth, saying, "Shame on John Kerry. The lecturing he gave us was very colonialistic and imperialistic."
Cartoons have also been already drawn since the announcement came just a few hours ago.
There have been plenty of cartoons. It was actually really tricky to choose one. One of the most popular ones is by Kenyan political cartoonist. His name is Gado. And actually, this cartoon was drawn up. It was a prophecy for him about the decision of the Supreme Court, showing an image of the six-judge bench, ignoring the evidence and the ballot papers being hidden there beneath that rolling red carpet. And of course, on the sidelines, you have the media covering the event. You have John Kerry on the right-hand corner cheering on the sidelines. Now, another image that stood out to me, this isn't a cartoon, but I thought it was very interesting, is this one through Twitter, how Baba, which means father in Swahili, is walking away. It's a nickname for Raila Odinga, away from the Supreme Court. It's that cliched image of an archetypal hero walking away very calmly from an explosive scene. Now, I want to end on a slightly lighter note from one user. Her name is Lioness, and she's decided to take the occasion to give out some advice to the ladies out there. She says, "If your boyfriend is an NASA, that's the opposition supporter, today is a perfect day to ask for money from them." They're excited, so they'll give it over.
Yeah, because you have to then pay for another campaign, of course.
Indeed, coming up in 60 days'
You only
time.
have 60 days' time. Elizabeth, your reaction to this story?
I think actually it's a good thing that there were enough irregularities and the Supreme Court decided that no, that could not go on. I think, to borrow a term from a non-tenured ex-professor, a karma for John Kerry.
John Kerry, who you covered quite a bit when it was the Iran negotiations. Does this taint the view of many?
I don't think it does. To those that have been following his move, certainly they felt that John Kerry and his counterpart, Mohammad Javad Zarif, were very much responsible for the deal going through. They pushed on through the early hours of the morning, and I think certainly the international observers are going to be partially blamed for this, but another election coming up. So let's keep an eye on that and stay a little bit more positive on this story.
All right, let's stay positive. Sanam Shanti, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.